Prince William caught a guard leaking info to Camilla's staff, the instant dismissal that followed. Prince William had always known that his life would be one of duty, but as he stepped into his role within the royal family, the weight of responsibility often felt heavier than he could have imagined. His role was far from glamorous. It involved maintaining the traditions of a family that had been a symbol of stability for the United Kingdom for centuries. Yet behind the polished image of the royal family, there were many things that required careful attention, and at times, even more care in handling. One of those things was the trust he had to place in the people around him, the staff who were there to maintain the royal household, keep things running smoothly, and ensure the security and privacy of his family. As the Duke of Cambridge, Prince William took these responsibilities seriously. It wasn't just a matter of ceremonial duties or posing for pictures. He understood the gravity of the position he held, and more importantly, he understood the risks involved. The royal family was constantly under the watchful eye of the public, but more than that, it was also a family with secrets that needed to be kept. Royal matters, political discussions, personal affairs, everything had to be handled with the utmost discretion. But like any other large organization, there was always a risk that someone within might breach that trust. For most of the staff, these were the unspoken rules. They were expected to uphold the secrecy, to serve with dedication and respect, and to understand that their actions could have serious repercussions for the royal family if they were not careful. And Prince William was no exception when it came to holding those around him to high standards. He had been raised in this environment, and from an early age, he was taught that loyalty to the crown was paramount. So when it became clear that one of the royal guards was acting strangely, William knew that something was off. It wasn't an immediate suspicion, nor was it something that could be easily detected. The guard had been on duty for several months, always appearing professional, calm, and efficient. But there was a subtle change in his behavior that William couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the occasional glance or a strange look in his eye. It was the small things. The guard was now taking more breaks than usual, lingering in areas where he wasn't needed. It was a little strange, but not entirely suspicious at first glance. However, Prince William was sharp, and his instincts told him that there was more to this than met the eye. He wasn't the kind to jump to conclusions, but his duty to his family and the country was far too important to overlook even the smallest of signs. So, William began to keep an eye on the guard, watching his movements in the background. He did it discreetly, of course. This wasn't something he could openly share with others in the household. He knew that any accusation or even a hint of suspicion could lead to rumors that would spiral out of control. But William couldn't help it. There was something about the guard's behavior that just didn't sit right with him. It wasn't malicious, but it was certainly odd. Over the next few days, William watched the guard from a distance. He began paying more attention to where the guard went, who he spoke to, and when he made his moves. Prince William had seen enough of the staff's daily routines to know that something was off. The guard was making trips into areas where he shouldn't have been, speaking with people who weren't part of his usual circle. This was the type of behavior that had the potential to endanger the family, even if the intentions were not necessarily harmful. And William knew that even the slightest lapse in security could have far-reaching consequences. At the same time, William was careful not to make any accusations prematurely. He knew that people could be distracted, tired, or simply acting outside the usual protocol for reasons that had nothing to do with betrayal. He also understood that people, especially in high-pressure environments like the royal household, often acted strangely for personal reasons that had nothing to do with their jobs. So, he tried to give the benefit of the doubt. But still, the guard's actions kept bothering him. It wasn't long before the situation escalated. One afternoon, William overheard a conversation between the guard and another member of the household staff. The words that were exchanged were casual, but they sent a chill down William's spine. The guard was discussing something that was, quite frankly, nobody else's business. It wasn't a matter of personal opinion or idle gossip. It was information that was supposed to remain confidential. And the way the guard was speaking suggested that he knew more than he should have about family matters. The information he was sharing was supposed to be kept within the royal circle, but it was clear that the guard was leaking it to someone outside of the family. That was when Prince William knew that his suspicions had been right all along. What was even more disturbing was the fact that the information wasn't being passed to just anyone. It was being shared with people who, to William's knowledge, had no business knowing these details. The conversation confirmed his worst fears. The guard had been leaking sensitive information that could jeopardize the royal family's safety and reputation. And worse still, it appeared that this wasn't a one-time occurrence. This was something that had been happening behind the scenes for some time, and William now realized the extent of the breach of trust. The realization hit him hard. He had to act swiftly, but he also knew that this wasn't something he could address lightly. A situation like this required a delicate balance of action and discretion. The last thing he wanted was for the royal family to be embroiled in a scandal that could have been prevented. But William also knew that this wasn't just a matter of convenience. It was a matter of loyalty, security, and family. A breach like this had to be addressed immediately, and there was no room for hesitation. Trust was everything, and once it was broken, it could never be fully restored. At that moment, Prince William realized the full extent of the situation. He couldn't let this go on any longer. He had to confront the issue head-on, even if it meant making a difficult decision that would impact the lives of the people involved. The guard had violated the unspoken rules of loyalty that held the royal family together, and William knew that the only way to prevent any further damage was to take swift and decisive action. As the days passed, Prince William continued to observe the guard from a distance, gathering evidence and confirming his suspicions. It was clear now that the guard's actions could no longer be overlooked. His loyalty to the family had been compromised, and Prince William knew that he would have to make a tough decision, one that would ultimately protect the integrity of the royal family and ensure that such a breach of trust would never happen again. As Prince William stood quietly in the hallway, he could feel the weight of the decision pressing on his shoulders. The discovery of the guard's betrayal was like a shadow that loomed over him. His mind raced, replaying the events of the last few days. The guard, a trusted member of the royal staff, had been passing information to people outside the royal household. It wasn't just a matter of curiosity or idle conversation. The information he had been leaking was confidential, and its disclosure could have caused significant damage to the royal family's security and reputation. William had to face the reality that one of his own had betrayed him and his family. It wasn't easy for him. Loyalty was something that was drilled into him from a young age. His entire upbringing had been about serving the monarchy with honor and respect. To see someone, especially someone within the royal household, violate that trust was not only disheartening but also deeply troubling. The more William thought about it, the clearer it became. He couldn't let this betrayal slide. The royal family had always stood as a symbol of unity and stability, and it was his job to ensure that this image was never compromised. A breach of trust, especially one so serious, could not be allowed to fester. But he also understood that this wasn't a simple matter. It wasn't about confronting the guard publicly or making a scene. No, it was about handling the situation with the kind of quiet, dignified action that was expected from the royal family. A swift resolution was needed, but it had to be done with discretion, without drawing unnecessary attention. William decided to take matters into his own hands. He couldn't afford to wait for someone else to handle it. The royal staff had long understood that any betrayal, no matter how small, would be met with consequences. The monarchy had always maintained a reputation for fairness, but also for strict discipline. It was this balance of justice and order that made the royal household so respected. However, what William was about to do would push this balance to its limits. This wasn't about punishing a member of staff for a simple mistake. It was about safeguarding the very heart of the monarchy. As he mulled over his decision, William realized the gravity of what was at stake. This wasn't just about the leaked information, it was about the respect and trust that the royal family had built over centuries. The monarchy wasn't just a symbol, it was a living institution, and it was fragile. One mistake, one act of betrayal, could have far-reaching consequences that might ripple through history. William knew that, and that's why he had to act quickly and decisively. He decided to confront the guard privately. He couldn't afford to let the guard's actions disrupt the smooth functioning of the royal household. But he also understood that a public confrontation would only add to the drama. Prince William had always valued privacy, and he knew that this issue, in particular, needed to be dealt with behind closed doors. It would be a conversation that neither of them would forget. The next morning, after the usual duties were over, William requested the guard to meet him in his private office. It was a tense moment. The guard, a man who had served with distinction for many years, was unaware that his time in the royal household was coming to an abrupt end. The door creaked open, and the guard stepped into the room, his face betraying no emotion. He stood at attention, as if expecting some routine discussion. But Prince William's expression was different today. It was serious, and the air in the room felt heavier than usual. For a moment, William just stood there, studying the man in front of him. He could see the faint flicker of uncertainty in the guard's eyes. There was no question about it now. The guard knew something was wrong. He probably had an inkling that his behavior had not gone unnoticed. But what William didn't know was how the guard would react. Would he deny everything? Would he try to explain himself? Or would he confess to what he had done? Prince William cleared his throat and began the conversation in a calm, composed tone. "I've noticed some unusual behavior over the past week," he said. His voice was steady, but there was an undeniable edge of authority behind it. "You've been interacting with certain people, discussing matters that are not for public knowledge. I need you to explain yourself." The guard stiffened, his hands shifting slightly at his sides. He knew exactly what William was talking about. The tension in the room became almost palpable. For a moment there was silence. The guard looked away, unable to meet William's gaze. Prince William's heart sank. He had hoped that maybe the guard had acted out of carelessness or misunderstanding, but the way he avoided the conversation only confirmed the worst. "I'm not accusing you, but I need to understand why you've been passing information to people outside of the household," William continued. "This is a matter of trust and loyalty. You've breached that trust, and I need to know how and why." The guard's eyes darted around the room, clearly conflicted. William could tell that the man was struggling with the truth. He had probably hoped that his actions would go unnoticed or that they would be dismissed as insignificant. But what he didn't realize was that William was paying attention to every detail. The royal family didn't allow mistakes like this to slide under the radar. Finally, after a long pause, the guard spoke, his voice low and resigned. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. "I've been talking to some people. I thought I was helping. I didn't realize the weight of it." His words were apologetic, but they lacked conviction. There was no real remorse in his tone, only a sense of regret that his actions had been discovered. Prince William took a deep breath. He had heard enough. He had hoped that this wouldn't be the case, that perhaps the guard had been coerced or that there was some misunderstanding. But deep down, he knew the truth. The guard had willingly shared information with people who were not entitled to know it, and that was an unforgivable breach of trust. It wasn't just about the information. It was about the principle of loyalty that held the royal household together. The decision had already been made. William had to act fast. He couldn't allow this to drag on any longer. The royal family's security and reputation were too important, and William knew that leaving this situation unresolved would only create more problems. "You're dismissed," Prince William said firmly, his voice unwavering. "Your actions have broken the trust we placed in you. This cannot be allowed to continue." The guard stood motionless, his face a mixture of shock and resignation. He hadn't expected this. But there was no room for negotiation, no chance for second chances. This was the royal family, and loyalty was non-negotiable. The guard was escorted out of the office quietly. His time in the royal household was over. For William, it was the hardest part of his duty. But it was also the only choice. There could be no tolerance for betrayal. The royal family, with all its power and influence, had to remain a symbol of integrity. And to maintain that integrity, Prince William knew he had to take action, swiftly and without hesitation. The weight of the decision hung heavily in the air as Prince William watched the guard leave the room. The quiet, methodical steps of the guard as he was escorted out seemed to echo in the otherwise silent hallways. Prince William's mind raced. He had just made one of the hardest choices of his life, but it was one that he knew was necessary for the protection and integrity of his family. There was no room for compromise when it came to loyalty, and in the end, the guard's actions had left William with no other option. But even as the door to his office closed behind the guard, Prince William couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sadness. He had known this man for years. He had been a part of the household staff for as long as William could remember, trusted and relied upon to carry out his duties without question. And yet, in a moment, everything had changed. The trust that had been built over years had been shattered by a single, reckless action. Prince William leaned back in his chair, staring at the empty room in front of him. It was hard to come to terms with the fact that someone so close to him had betrayed not just his family, but everything the royal household stood for. Trust, honor, loyalty, these were the principles that kept everything intact. And now, with one act of carelessness, one lapse in judgment, all of that had been thrown into question. The guard's dismissal wasn't just a punishment, it was a statement. It was William's way of showing that no one, no matter how long they had served, was above the rules. It was a necessary action, but it wasn't one that came without cost. William had been raised to value fairness and justice, and yet this was a reminder that even justice could be cold and unyielding. As the hours passed, William couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered. He had done the right thing, but it didn't make the situation any easier. It didn't make the sting of betrayal any less sharp. Even now, as he tried to focus on his other duties, his thoughts kept drifting back to the guard. Had there been any signs he had missed? Could he have handled the situation differently? But deep down, he knew that there was no other way. The royal family's reputation and security were too important to allow such a breach to go unchecked, and the guard's actions were a reminder of just how fragile the walls of trust could be. In the royal household, everyone was expected to understand the gravity of their actions and the impact they had on the family as a whole. And when someone failed to live up to those expectations, there could be no leniency. Later that evening, William found himself walking the halls of the palace, trying to clear his mind. The weight of the decision still felt heavy, but he knew he couldn't afford to dwell on it. He had made his choice, and now he had to move forward. There was no turning back, and he couldn't allow his emotions to cloud his judgment. The royal family had always been built on a foundation of discipline and order, and it was up to him to ensure that those values were upheld. As he walked through the grand corridors, the familiar sights of the palace offered little comfort. The tapestries, the portraits, the lavish rooms, it all felt distant now, as if they were merely a backdrop to the drama that had unfolded in his own life. His thoughts turned to the future, to the role he would one day take on as the next in line to the throne. The decisions he made now would shape the monarchy for generations to come, and he couldn't afford to let anything jeopardize that. It wasn't just about the guard anymore. It was about the legacy of the royal family, the future of the monarchy, and the trust that the public placed in them. William knew that the eyes of the world were always on them, waiting for them to make a mistake. The monarchy had to remain a symbol of strength and unity, and the actions of one individual could affect that. That was the burden of leadership, a burden that weighed heavily on his shoulders. The following day, Prince William was scheduled to meet with senior members of the royal staff. It was a routine meeting, but after the events of the previous day, it felt different. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the royal household was being tested in ways he hadn't anticipated. The betrayal by the guard was just the beginning. What other challenges lay ahead? What other threats, seen or unseen, were lurking just beyond the horizon? As the staff gathered in the conference room, William addressed the group with a calm, measured voice. There was no mention of the guard's dismissal. Such matters were always kept private. But there was an underlying sense of gravity in the air, a shared understanding among the staff that things had changed. William spoke to them about the importance of loyalty and trust, about the need to uphold the integrity of the royal family in all things. It was a message that needed to be heard, and it was a message that he would continue to reinforce in the coming days and weeks. The staff listened intently, each of them understanding the weight of his words. They had all seen what had happened to the guard, and they knew that there would be no tolerance for any further breaches of trust. Prince William's authority was firm, but there was a sense of fairness in his approach. He didn't rule with an iron fist, but he expected those around him to understand the gravity of their responsibilities. As the meeting concluded, William remained behind for a moment, staring out of the large windows that overlooked the palace gardens. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light across the grounds. It was a peaceful sight, but for William, it only served to remind him of the challenges that lay ahead. The future was uncertain, and he knew that it would be filled with difficult decisions, decisions that would shape the monarchy for years to come. But for now, all he could do was focus on the present. He had made the right choice in dismissing the guard, but that didn't make the situation any easier. It was a necessary action, but it had come at a cost. The royal family had lost a trusted member of their staff, and William had lost a sense of security he had once taken for granted. As the day came to an end, William walked back to his private quarters, his mind still occupied with the events of the past few days. The weight of responsibility seemed heavier than ever before, but he knew that he had to keep moving forward. There was no time to look back, no time to second-guess his decisions. The monarchy had to remain strong, and that meant he had to remain strong as well. The challenges ahead were unknown, but William knew one thing for certain. The royal family would continue to stand, no matter what. And as long as he was there to lead, he would do everything in his power to protect the trust and integrity that had been built over centuries. The days following the guard's dismissal were both quiet and tense for Prince William. He had done what he felt was necessary, but the weight of the decision still lingered, clouding his thoughts. Though the palace was as calm as ever, a certain unease hung in the air. His actions had made waves, and while the immediate problem had been solved, there were still underlying questions that he couldn't ignore. How would this incident affect the staff's morale? Would there be more to uncover? And perhaps most concerning of all, was the royal household truly as secure as he had once believed? In the days after the incident, Prince William threw himself into his duties, perhaps more than ever before. There were public appearances to attend, meetings to be had, and royal events that needed his attention. But even as he went through the motions, part of his mind remained preoccupied with the recent events. The royal family had always been the epitome of unity and stability, but the breach of trust had shaken him. The strength of the institution relied on more than just the actions of a few. It relied on everyone working in harmony and trust. So the question lingered. How many more guards, staff, or even members of the household were walking this fine line between loyalty and betrayal? To William's relief, the staff seemed to accept the situation without much unrest. They went about their duties as they always had, and the incident was soon forgotten by most. However, there was still an underlying shift in the atmosphere, subtle but noticeable. The royal household had always been a place where discretion and loyalty were expected, and while most members of the staff had nothing but respect for the family, there was now a certain air of caution, as if the guards' actions had left a mark on everyone. It was a reminder that no one, regardless of their position, was completely immune from suspicion. And perhaps that was a good thing. The guards' behavior had shown just how fragile trust could be, even among the most trusted. As Prince William continued to navigate the responsibilities of his role, he couldn't help but reflect on the lessons the situation had taught him. Leadership wasn't just about making difficult decisions in the moment. It was about understanding the consequences of those decisions. It was about making sure that the actions taken were in line with the values the monarchy represented. He had acted swiftly to remove the breach, but he knew that the ripple effects of his choice could last for a long time. And what if something like this happened again? What would he do the next time? That night, as he sat alone in his study, the weight of these thoughts pressed on him once more. The royal family had always been built on tradition and history, and William understood that his role, as the future monarch, was to preserve those values for future generations. But he also knew that times were changing, and with it, the expectations placed upon him. The world was a different place now than it had been when his grandmother, the Queen, had taken the throne. The monarchy was constantly under scrutiny, and the pressure to maintain the family's dignity and security only seemed to grow with each passing day. In the midst of all this, Prince William realized something important. He couldn't be afraid to make the tough calls. It was easy to shy away from confrontation, to let things slide in the hopes that they would work themselves out. But that wasn't leadership. Leadership meant making difficult decisions even when they were uncomfortable, even when they carried consequences that might not be immediately clear. He had already proven that he was willing to act when necessary. Now he needed to be certain that he was prepared for whatever came next. A few days later, William took a walk through the palace gardens. The evening air was crisp, and the scent of blooming flowers mixed with the earthy smell of freshly cut grass. It was a peaceful scene, one that had always brought him comfort in times of uncertainty. As he walked along the path, he found himself thinking about the future of the monarchy, his role within it, and what kind of leader he hoped to be. There were so many expectations placed on him, so many responsibilities, and yet, in this moment of quiet reflection, he found a sense of clarity. He knew that the monarchy needed to evolve, just as society was evolving. The world was changing, and in order to preserve the family's legacy, they would have to adapt. The thought brought him a small sense of comfort. Change didn't have to mean the loss of tradition. The monarchy had faced challenges before, and it had always endured. Prince William wasn't just a bystander in this process. He was part of it, and he would shape the future in his own way, while still respecting the values that had been passed down through the generations. As he returned to the palace, William realized that his actions over the past week had not been just about protecting the royal family's reputation. It had been about setting a precedent. He had made a decision that was difficult but necessary. He had upheld the values of loyalty and trust, and he had shown that no one was above the rules. That was the kind of leader he wanted to be, one who acted decisively, but who also understood the long-term impact of those actions. In the days that followed, Prince William made it a point to speak with other members of the staff, quietly checking in to ensure that everything was running smoothly. He wanted to reassure them that the events of the past week were behind them, and that there was no lingering mistrust among the staff. He also wanted to make it clear that loyalty was still the foundation upon which the royal household stood. But he didn't want to appear distant or cold. He wanted to be approachable to let his staff know that he was there for them and that he valued their service. The staff, for the most part, responded positively. They appreciated his leadership, and the sense of unity within the household slowly began to return. William understood that this would take time. Trust wasn't something that could be restored overnight, but it was being rebuilt piece by piece with every action and every word. He had learned a valuable lesson through this experience. Leadership wasn't just about making decisions from a place of authority. It was about understanding people, understanding the delicate balance between maintaining tradition and embracing change, and knowing when to stand firm and when to show compassion. As the weeks passed, the palace returned to its normal routine. The staff continued with their duties, and Prince William resumed his royal responsibilities. But the events of the past few weeks had changed him. He had seen firsthand how fragile trust could be and how quickly it could be broken. But he had also seen the strength of the family, the strength of the monarchy, and the power of decisive leadership. And as he looked ahead to the future, he felt more prepared than ever to take on the challenges that awaited him. In the end, the true test of leadership wasn't about making the right decision in the moment. It was about understanding the long-term consequences of those decisions and having the courage to face them. Prince William had faced that test, and he had passed. The monarchy was in good hands, and with every challenge that arose, he would continue to lead with integrity, fairness, and strength.